Welcome to the Beacon Way podcast, hosted by award-winning executive team of Beacon Media and Marketing. With over 3 decades of experience, Adrian, Jennifer, and Ken give you an insider's view of what's working, what's not, and what's on the horizon for digital marketing. Grow your business today with the Beacon Way podcast.
Welcome back to the Beacon Way podcast. This is Adrian Wilkerson, and I am on with Melvin Varghese today. He is a licensed psychologist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And in 2015, Dr. Varghese founded Selling the Couch, which is a podcast to help therapists move from clinical to online income, which I think is a fascinating thing that you're doing. I love what you're doing there. So on this podcast, he interviews successful practitioners about how they've built their practices, social media marketing experts, and shares lessons as he uses his own clinical skills to create an online business powered by podcasting and online courses. So the podcast, congratulations. This was so exciting for me to read, Melvin, that the podcast is one of the top career podcasts in Apple Podcast and has been downloaded over 1.8 million times. That's amazing. And broadcast in over 125 countries. So congratulations. That is amazing.
Oh, Adrian, thank you so much. It's it doesn't often make sense because I'm like naturally introverted, and sometimes I actually last week we passed our 10-year anniversary, and which
Right?
is been not exactly the career path that I envisioned when I got licensed. So
Yeah, I'll bet. I'll bet. So I'm excited to get to share your story today and to build off of, you and I both got to be on a roundtable at the Mental Health Marketing Conference in Nashville, Tennessee last fall. And we just had a really amazing connection. And I loved the conversation that we were having about working moms and working dads and just the dynamic that we have now in our culture of working and that dynamic, historically working dads meant something different than in many ways it does now. It was, dad went off to work, came back, interacted with the kids, and he was a dad and he worked. And now those are blended together into a very different dynamic. So I'm very excited to get into that with you today. Like you said, this was not quite the career path you thought you were going to have with your PhD and whatnot. So tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into this side of it, and how that dynamic has kind of erupted in your life of this working dad dynamic. And what does that mean in your world these days?
yeah, I mean it's a wonderful question. So we have a daughter, and she was born 2 months premature. So I think that gives some, she hopefully gives some context as well. So, for me, I think we struggled for a season with infertility and just even navigating all of that. And then once we found out we were pregnant, it was like, an incredibly exciting time.
Yeah.
Uh, and basically every test and screening was perfectly normal. And then 32 weeks, I was about to go to Podcast Movement, which was in Philadelphia. It's like
Yeah.
5:50 in the morning, and I'm in the bathroom. My wife screams. There's At that point, there's like water on the floor, and I'm like, what happened? So we
Right.
jet to the ER, and they basically said it was Monday, and they said, we're going to try to keep the baby in for 4 more weeks to get to 36 weeks. We lasted until Thursday, which was then an emergency C-section and all of
Wow.
that. And I just share that because, for the longest time, like I really wanted a daughter, and she was born, at 3:20 a.m., 3 pounds, 12 ounces.
Wow.
And so, it was an extremely challenging time. I think in many ways, this was just, pre-pandemic. It really forced me to think about business and life and what priorities are. She also ended up not being able to sit up when she needed to. So we ended
Wow.
up doing another year of like early childhood intervention with PT multiple times a week and all of that stuff. So I just share all of that because in those early days it was PT, but then Fridays turned into daddy daughter days where we would go to like, I was like, I want to do other stuff besides, like at least like adult fun
Right.
stuff. So we'd go to like art galleries or museums or little things
Oh.
like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and when she went back to school, now in the summers we do the same thing.
Mm.
And yeah, more recently, my wife's had to go back into the office as, many jobs have, kind of transitioned from work from home to hybrid to, back in the office. And it is a new season where I'm still figuring this out. This is only within the last like several months. And, it means, pickups and drop offs and, giving her a bath and getting dinner together and all of that stuff. And
Sure.
while trying to,
Yeah.
manage STC stuff. So, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's challenging, and I think it gives you I don't know. I have so much respect for single parents, who manage
Mhm.
this. I also have I think as a guy, like, I have so much respect for women who have navigated this for, decades and decades,
Mhm.
and yet there
Mhm.
was, like I feel like, among at least, certain population of men particularly, there was, like, a lack of understanding of, like, how much
For sure.
sacrifice was involved,
Mm. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it for sure. So I know when Jennifer and I merged companies in 2012 and started Beacon Media and Marketing, like I was telling you earlier, that we were both working moms. My son was 4 and he hadn't started kindergarten yet. Her kids were all in middle school or high school because I think all 3 of her kids are within 3.5 years of each other.
Mhm,
So she has always has had her hands full, you know.
mhm,
Um, but one of the big things for us was even wanting to create a work environment where that single parent or that working parent,
mhm,
because both dynamics exist now, that they didn't have to get deal with the eyebrow raise
mhm,
when they're having to cut out to take care of a kid. And the, the work from home piece, I will say, has dramatically increased our ability to be more flexible with parents. That really wasn't a thing, like you said, until
mhm,
2020,
mhm,
although we had about 4 of us that were remote prior to 2020. So it was a little easier transition for us. But yeah, it's increased the ability to be flexible and be a parent and still work. Um, but I am fascinated with this transition of men stepping in and doing this more. My husband's actually done this. He retired 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, due to some long-term medical things, and our family was able to allow him, that we could make that work.
mhm,
But it was a fascinating transition for he and I,
mhm,
because he always worked jobs where he was, gone from 5 o'clock sometimes in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening with commuting and whatnot. And so he didn't work jobs where he could leave and take care of anything. And so all of a sudden now he can. And I had to mentally shift. I had to invite him in and stop almost the habitual patterns of just I have to do everything. And that was, he and I are both very dominant personalities. So that was an interesting transition. We have lots of conversations where he struggles with still feeling like he's bringing value to our
mhm,
marriage and our family
mhm,
without him working full time
mhm,
in that sort of thing. And I mean, some of that's tied to he's retired, he doesn't necessarily have an income, but the amount of stuff that he does
mhm,
is amazing now.
mhm,
And to not have to think or worry about that and knowing he's got it, just the massive weight off of my heart and my shoulders on that
mhm.
is phenomenal. Have you guys seen kind of any kind of transition like that for you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're navigating, and I've had a lot of conversations with my wife about that too, because I'm like, oh, I want to be doing more stuff with STC, but I realize like I also don't want to take away and be on, work on weekends and nights and stuff because that's like family time. And Yeah, I think we've definitely had a lot of conversations navigating what that balance is like. And it's interesting because it sounds like your husband and I both like struggle with this piece of like so much of our identity gets wrapped up in like the income that's produced versus
Mhm.
like the tangible things that we're doing, uh, which
Right.
which I mean, I it's still something I'm like working through and sort of, struggling and navigating with. Um, but yeah, but I think, we've tried to set up some parameters. So among them is,
Mm.
fortunately, uh, just my wife has a job that it could like really stretch into a lot of hours, but where fortunately she works is, it can be pretty much confined to the day. And so we get a lot of our nights and weekends together, and we try to just keep that like family time, and keep that
Mhm.
sacred time, unless like there's some emerging like emergency. But it is fascinating. I mean, think to your earlier point of how we are all like collectively as a society and then individually navigating this transition of, like gender roles and work and
Mhm.
all of these different things. And the thing also, I guess the nuance I also thought about as you were sharing was it looks so different for every family.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
there's no, and I think that's the challenge of it, right? There's not like one model, right? That's like we're looking at and saying this is the right way to do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, do you have any like tips or specific things that have helped you navigate through this? Like I said, we're all kind of navigating this together at varying stages in the process. But what are some things that have really helped you find your way through?
Well, I think one is, and I'm still navigating this because this work from, like her going back into the office is a pretty new transition. But I think one is just realizing there's probably at a practical level, there's not as much time for me to do what I can normally do in a span of a week. So just giving myself grace and understanding to say, like, hey, if there's like, for example, I used to always say, okay, I'm going to try to do three like big, like needle moving tasks every week. And now it's more like two, one and a half, two, right? I
Gotcha.
may not be able to move as fast through it, but it also forces further optimization, like that question of, am I the one that should be doing this? Or,
Ooh,
can
yes.
my like head of ops like handle this better than me? And so that way I can kind of focus on that, one and a half to two needle mover kind of things.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that.
yeah. I think I mean, that's one. I think the other things are like just, I try to theme my days, which has been
Mm,
incredibly helpful. So, like Mondays and Wednesdays are tend to be my deep work days. Tuesdays tend to be like podcast recording, and
mm,
then like our podcasting community coaching calls. And then Thursdays tend to be like our big, like heavy coaching days. And so, part of it, I was trying to like structure it that way, even as our daughter was born. But I think theming the days, and knowing, Adrian, this is a little embarrassing. I'll share it with you here. I mean, I've got an Excel document, like an
mhm.
Excel sheet that's like color coded down to the hour, where I
Wow.
have to
Yeah.
like figure out because otherwise, like things aren't either my mind is going to get too stressed out about all the things that I have to do,
Hmm.
or just knowing that, like, for example, I've got a time to like schedule out LinkedIn posts on Tuesdays at 4, right? So
Right. Yeah.
stuff like that. So,
Sometimes that's what it takes. I've had eras where it's my version of that, a little more random, but still, my son is very schedule focused. And so when he was little, one of my techniques, because my husband had to go back to school right about the time my son was born. And so I was a primary breadwinner as well as having to be full time. Again, thank God for family that helped me through that era. But man, at the beginning of the day, he'd always ask me, "What are we doing today?" And so I'd run through the day because if I told him we were doing this, and this, there was no way I was getting out of doing this, and this, including going to the gym. So he saved me for years there because he really liked the play area at the gym.
mm,
And so, I mean, even as young as 3, he'd be like, what we doing? What we doing? And it's like, here's what we're doing. And he's like, okay, we're doing groceries now, mom, right? And it was amazing how he would keep track of. So yeah, he was my scheduler for a long time. It was really cute until he started school. Uh, but yeah, I live by my schedule. I have stuff scheduled out oftentimes, 15-minute increments, like you said, like I need to do this here. And sometimes it's the only way to keep the sanity
Yeah.
is to get it down on paper.
Right.
And so, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes
Well,
being that
even
detailed.
well, no, I was just gonna even say, like, even with that schedule, right? Like, I think that also forces like priority. Like, does this need to be on my schedule? Is this like a big like life or business task? And so I think that's
Sure.
been the other fascinating thing of
Yeah.
like it forces you to really prioritize things in a way that I hadn't had to before, like
Hmm.
pre becoming a parent. So
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. How important is it really? Because every moment is precious.
right.
Yeah, definitely. Well, how have you, this is, definitely a more intimate question, but how are you navigating the identity piece? Because I know, like you identified, that's something I know my husband struggles with. And I said something we talk about quite often, and I'm sure other listeners out there, that's forefront in their hearts and minds too. Do you have any kind of tips around that or any parts that have helped you?
Yeah. Uh, you know, I
I know
feel
that's a
like
hard one.
no, like it is. And I think like one thing I've just coming to learn is just having a lot of like grace and compassion for myself, my wife, our child, because again, there's no manual on how to do this, and the day to day and the week to week can really vary, right? Like practical level, we've got stuff planned out for Monday. Our kiddo gets sick, wakes up sick, right?
Right?
Like all that stuff's got out the door. And so
Totally.
I think like kindness and grace for myself and others is one. I think the other piece is just um, having grace for myself that just because I can't do as much in terms of quantity as before in this season, that doesn't make me any less of a man, any less of an entrepreneur, any of
Yeah.
those things. And I mean, Adrian, like, I don't know what it's been like for you, but we start all of these businesses and it's so hard to not have a part of our identity get tied up in it, right? Because they're like our little babies and
Yes.
and yet when we become parents, like it does force this weird like leaving and cleaving to our businesses, right? Like
That's a good way
um
to put it.
yeah, and that's I don't know that I think I don't know that I have a great answer to that part of it, but I think just it's been helpful to see that I want to design, at least for me, right? Like, I think just talking to a lot of really successful business people, I think there's kind of this two things, right? So either you can sort of optimize for lifestyle or you can optimize, maximize revenue, right? And
Mm,
and sometimes like it's really hard beyond a certain threshold revenue wise to really start also maximizing for lifestyle because you actually have multiple
yeah.
teams or even if like it's like you've got it all delegated, there's stuff going through your head of like and it's hard
Mhm.
to be present with your loved ones outside of work, right? So I think that's a question I think a lot about. I know we had a little bit of conversation on that, like enoughness and
Mhm.
what is like, what do I actually want in terms of revenue? Even, even down to like social media, I'm quite active now on LinkedIn and I've like really pared back recently because I'm like, yeah, Fridays, like when our daughter's in school, Fridays are like my self-care days. I go to the wellness spa in the morning and I'm like, I am
Yeah.
not going to be on LinkedIn on Friday morning. I love you guys, but I am not
Right,
sitting
right,
here like commenting so,
right.
but
Healthy boundaries
it
are
is.
hard, but they're so important.
Yeah, it is absolutely. But I think the nuance in that is, I think especially for entrepreneurs, we can so easily gravitate toward external metrics as a validator for who we are and our own perceived success, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, just because LinkedIn's just what we're talking about now. Like, I remember I was posting so much more because that's what experts kept telling me, and because that's going to grow your audience and all these things. But then I kept noticing the experts weren't actually parents, or they were like giving it
Right.
through like a single person, or they were dating or something, and I was like, oh,
Right.
I should have understood that context a little better.
Their dynamics different from that
Right.
standpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely.
it is, I love how you said that there is a choice in some ways that you have to pick your primary goal. Is it
Mhm.
revenue or is it for your lifestyle? And I know mine's been out of balance often in the
Mm,
last 13 years,
mm.
and sometimes it was the business needed it at a
Yeah.
certain time. And so I've started referring to it as work life harmony instead of work
Mm,
life balance because
mm.
there is no balance in it.
Right.
It's a seesaw, you know,
Yep.
but harmony. I have always loved music. I played piano for forever, but the idea of harmony, it's a counterpoint.
Mm,
There's times where, the treble goes high and the bass is kind of fades into the background. And there's
mm,
times, my son is a musician and watching him build a band and play, there's, different instruments that have different focuses at different times. And I'm like, that is more what our life is as entrepreneurs, as
mm,
working parents, is there are times where your kid needs you,
mm,
whether it's a phase in their life, whether it's finals. My son's a junior in high school, and finals week, leading up to finals week, school is not his thing. Music is his thing. It is all hands on deck to help
mm,
him get through those finals and get through school, high school, so he can move on to do what he really wants to do, which is
mm,
build instruments and, share his story and inspire others with his music. And so, and then there's been times where Beacon, it's like, okay, industry shifting yet
mm,
again.
mhm,
We have to pivot the whole company. So guess what? It's going to be all hands on deck for the next however many months it takes us to pivot the company. So it's like different moments. And I mean, the seesaw is kind of that, but seesaw just feels very one dimensional.
yeah.
And life is not that. It's a song, it's a harmony, it's point and counterpoint, and you know, the melody is primary sometimes, the chord. I mean, it just there's so
Mhm,
many pieces to it like that. Um, but I really, appreciate what you're saying because you're right. There's kind of two different paths, and sometimes you're bouncing back and forth a little bit. And
yeah.
I know there's times I kind of come up for air after one phase and go, oh, okay, wow, I really need to work on getting a little more harmony in the right areas here for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's all of that is like incredibly true. I think one of the things again, I feel like all of this is just a process where you're constantly refining and figuring it out. But as long as
Mhm.
you kind of have a North Star of like, this is where that alignment looks like, right? So I want to
Mm,
design, like, for example, I want to really design my business around my family and my health.
right.
Like, and so asking that question, okay, is this current season, is it like in alignment to that? And or like to your
Right.
point, is this just a season where we got to invest a little heavier, right? Like I feel like right
Hmm.
now, even as we're having this conversation with so much like economic and political uncertainty, right? There's
Right.
definitely a feeling
Hmm.
of like, where are things going?
Very true. Very true. Well, and you were sharing with me, you've got some stuff kind of percolating
Mm.
for a specific kind of executive coaching. So I think that ties into a lot of what we're talking about. Can you share a little bit more about that with our audience?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in India. I was born in India, and our family immigrated to the U.S. after first grade. So English is actually my second language, and I remember like all of second grade, I did not speak like a lick of
Oh
English.
no.
So you
Oh
know,
wow, that must have been challenging.
challenging. I'd never seen pizza before, never seen cheese before. Like I remember a
Sure.
cousin came up asking if I wanted cheese pizza, and I said like this, which in India means yes. And I realized that's the exact opposite, and all of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I think the big piece for me, I've been thinking and marinating on is there's a real need for like executive coaching for Indian. founders, Indian like managers, Indian executives, particularly from someone that, you know, has a PhD in psychology, right? So has that sort of background, but then also kind of has that lived experience of both entrepreneurship and sort of the multiple cultural layers, navigating between, kind of the thing is, we like, the Indian side, like we come from like a shame and honor culture, right? So when you
Mhm.
deviate sort of from the norm, it's not just about the path that you forge, right? It's about like what does that communicate about your family and the support that it gives
Interesting.
to your family, right? So in
Mhm.
some ways it's like positive, but other ways it can really like uh it creates a lot of shame and guilt when you deviate
Mhm.
from, particularly like what are perceived as very stable and economically viable paths, It's sort of
Mhm.
I don't know, there's a stereotype, I think, in a lot of like South Asian and just Asian cultures, like you're either become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or you're a failure, and that's the
Right.
four
Yeah.
options, right? So,
Mhm.
so yeah, just thinking through that, because I know that so many, so many like Asian Indian, particularly Asian and Indian men that are in
Mhm.
position, they're navigating all of these things with regard to like growing their businesses, growing their
Right.
influence,
Mhm.
but navigating these things behind the scenes. I think another big
Right.
one related is a lot of surrender and caregiving for like parents. And it brings up a
Mhm.
lot of things around like what is the role of, like in sort of traditional Indian society, it is expected, particularly that, if there's a son, right, the son cares for parents, and that
Right.
involves like them coming and living with you and all of these things, and
Mhm.
navigating that if you're like an executive or you're a founder, and
Right?
so
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. I have encountered more and more in the last 2 months people talking about multi-generational living.
mm, mm,
And it's really interesting to me because I feel like it's something America lost or
mm,
the West has lost
mhm,
of we don't I mean, it would be incredibly challenging for an executive. My father-in-law lives with us, and he's getting close to probably needing full-time care,
mm,
more than what we can provide.
mm.
And so how do we balance that with our lives, with not losing the experience and the wisdom that he has that we can gain?
Yeah.
And I think American culture shuffles off our elders,
Mhm,
and we've lost so much in that.
mhm.
And yet, how do you balance that with, like you said, being a founder and a CEO and the time and all of that? It's such a complex conundrum, if you
Yeah.
will, and probably very unique to each person.
Yeah.
But we're not, I mean, I feel like I'm hearing it talked about more often,
Mhm.
but that's brand new. Like I said, it's only been in the last 2 months that I'm even hearing this, much less you add in the extra layer of the cultural piece, like what you're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Very interesting time.
Yeah, I mean, I can just even like share and just be open. Like, we had our most recent like launch in, between January and February. Usually a 5-week launch. In week 3, my grandma died in India.
Mm.
So maternal grandmother, she was 94 years old. And
Wow.
so there's a moment where I'm like, okay, we're
Mm.
in the middle of a launch. Like, is this
Right.
the best time to go? But
Yeah.
I spent a lot of my summers, I mean, my parents would send, my brother and I back to India pretty much
Wow.
most summers. So I spent like 3, 2.5, 3 months and I would live with my mom's
Mm.
parents, right? And so they were very close to them. And I decided, support of my wife, again, like get on a flight from Philly. So I literally did a live stream on a Wednesday at 10 a.m. and then took an 8:40 PM international flight to Doha, and then which was 12
Wow.
hours, and then
Right. Yeah.
three 3.5 hours in Doha, and then 4.5 hours to India, and then 3-hour
Mm.
drive to like, where we live. And
Right.
But it was interesting just navigating it. Like, I'm so grateful that I went, but it was also like,
Mm.
my gosh, like how many layers to navigate, right? Like,
Yeah.
and figure out. So
Yeah. No, I think there's so much to that for sure. Um, but yeah, I'm excited that there's more of a conversation
mm,
bubbling to the surface around this. Because yeah, I'm very close with my parents and very close, and my brother and I talk about, because I'm the oldest,
mm,
so the expectation, well, they're all still in Alaska and I'm in Reno, Nevada. So we talk about how are we going to navigate that,
mm,
because he owns his own business as well.
mm,
So it's very layered, as you said. And even just having the conversation out there gives people permission to keep talking it and not having to hold it in and feel like they're the only ones. And I think that at least that's an important place to start.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the other nuance to that is, we live in this world where of social media where like business quote unquote successes are emphasized, but nuances are not always talked about.
Yeah.
But I think this is like the reality, right? Like I think what is the term like shoulder season, like for a lot of folks, right? With like growing
Right.
kids and aging parents. And
Hmm.
like and especially if you tack on entrepreneurship on top of that, that is a lot of complexity
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, a lot of stress on marriage and
Mm.
relationships.
Yeah.
And yeah, that again, if there isn't a conversation out there around it, then, it's kind of like I was sharing with you, like 13, 15 years ago, there wasn't much of a conversation around
Mm.
working moms, just like we're now getting into a conversation about working dads, and this next level that you're adding in with, Indian Asian executives. I think it's really amazing. That is one thing that I do appreciate about social media, is that it's bringing more awareness to these things that probably would have just been very isolated to regional
Mm.
communities and conversations historically. Um, so I appreciate that piece of it for sure, that it's kind of bringing a level of awareness for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that is like social media done well, right? It allows us to connect and be human and share one another's stories and be there together as we
Mhm.
navigate stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think your next step is for this side of things? Is it still in the percolating stages, or do you have kind of a vision for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still very much in the percolating, but it's like actively moving forward. I still want to make selling the couch kind of the main stuff because I do feel like it's my
Sure.
mission and I really don't see
Hmm.
more than, working with like a handful of folks, particularly
Hmm.
again related to like what does my actual schedule look like and what can I like
Yes,
feasibly do, right?
sure.
But I don't know, there's something, to be honest, it was so encouraging to see your face and just you light up, even share. And like when I shared it, because I think there's still a part of me, I feel like, oh, I'm not qualified to do this, because I haven't been an executive at a Fortune 500 company. But then, like friends have reminded me, Mel, but you also have a PhD in psychology. You've done entrepreneurship for
Right.
a decade. Like,
Yes. Yes.
and you've built something. So yeah, I'm excited for it, and I
Hmm.
think the one thing I'm just, trusting it will unfold, and as long as I'm
Sure.
just slow and intentional.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I appreciate your openness about it, because, like I said, starting that conversation, even just putting it out there, takes courage. And people will connect with that and connect with the humility around the way that you're coming at this. And I think that is such a needed and beautiful thing within the coaching world. There's so much hype and so much focus on even this kind of hustle culture and go, go, go. And a lot of the coaching historically has all been around that.
Mm,
And I'm starting to see some shifts in LinkedIn, even in the coaching message of like how to find work life balance, how to, you know, figure out how to shift your world from that revenue focus to lifestyle focus. So I love the balance that you're bringing into that world, and even just almost the permission that you putting it out there gives other working dads and other Indian Asian founders to go, yeah, that's me. And oh, I'm not alone. There's somebody else out there who in their heart knows that I'm struggling, or that there's people like me that are struggling. So thank you for having the courage to share that and put that out there, because I think that's always our default, is doubting ourselves first. And I know it's been mine. I'm like, who am I to put this out there? And, but it just, the humility of like, hey, we're all walking through this together. We don't have to have it figured out. But even being able to talk about it opens up so many amazing possibilities. So thank you for that.
No, you're so welcome. And thank you for, obviously creating a safe space to be able to talk about things like that.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Well, we're going to kind of wrap up here today, but is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today, Melvin, that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
No, I mean, honestly, the only other thing was I'm really glad that, Mental Health Marketing Conference allowed us to connect. And yeah, I'm just so encouraged and excited by all the wonderful things you guys are doing at Beacon.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Melvin. Are you going to be back this year?
Yes, that's the plan. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, we are too. I'm really looking forward to connecting. Maybe we can grab coffee or lunch or something.
Yeah, it's a great venue, right? It's just easy.
It is.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, thank you so much again, Melvin, for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your story. It's been a pleasure today. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne, for having me.
You have been listening to the Beacon Way podcast. Make sure to join us for new episodes every week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Beacon Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.